A black woman walks into a bank to open a multi-million-dollar account, and they tell her to leave because people like her aren't welcome. What the staff didn't know? She was the CEO, and 10 minutes later, she fired the entire branch. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Excuse me, ma'am. We'll need you to leave. We don't serve people like you here. Those were the exact words that pierced the quiet hum of the bank lobby. It was like someone had dropped a glass. Everything just stopped. Conversations paused, heads turned. And in that instant, an ordinary business visit turned into a moment charged with tension, disbelief, and quiet fury. Danielle Harris stood there, stunned. She wasn't confused, she wasn't lost, and she most certainly wasn't someone used to being dismissed. At 38, Danielle was one of the youngest and most successful black female CEOs in the tech world. Her cybersecurity company had just closed a multi-million-dollar government contract. Her name had been on the cover of Forbes's Tech Titans to watch. She was no stranger to boardrooms, venture capital firms, or headline-making success. And today, she was here for a simple reason: to finalize documents to open a commercial account worth $8 million at one of the nation's top banks. This branch in downtown Atlanta had been chosen specifically because it was near her firm's new headquarters. The appointment was scheduled, confirmed, and even followed up with a personal call from one of the bank's regional directors. Everything was set, except, apparently, the staff's attitude. A walk that spoke volumes. When Danielle walked into the bank, she turned heads, not because she was doing anything unusual, but because she exuded presence. Her navy blue suit was crisp, her makeup subtle but flawless, and her heels clicked against the polished marble floor with every step. She carried a leather laptop bag in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman in charge, but none of that mattered at the front desk. The receptionist, a young white woman, no older than 25, barely looked up from her monitor. When she finally did, her expression shifted immediately. It wasn't welcoming, it wasn't helpful. It was cautious, cold, and dismissive. Danielle smiled politely and said, "Good afternoon, I have a 2 p.m. appointment with Mr. Bennington regarding a business account." The woman blinked slowly, then let out a sharp, irritated breath. "We're not taking walk-ins today." "I'm not a walk-in. I'm scheduled, confirmed yesterday by your office." Now came the glance. That full body scan, the look that said, "You must be confused." The woman tapped on her keyboard, then shook her head. "There's no appointment listed under your name," she said flatly. "You'll need to come back. Or maybe try another location." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "I spoke directly with your commercial account officer. He gave me his word this meeting was booked." The woman didn't flinch. She raised her chin and, with her voice suddenly dripping in sarcasm, delivered the words that would shift the energy of the entire building. "We don't serve people like you here." The moment of realization, Danielle's heart pounded, not from fear, but from incredulity. She had experienced microaggressions before. She'd been underestimated, overlooked, interrupted in meetings, called by her first name when male colleagues were called Sir or Mr. But this? This was no microaggression. This was plain, unfiltered discrimination. A line had been crossed. Behind her, someone gasped. A man in a business suit who had been filling out a form looked up, eyes wide. A young mother in the corner glanced at Danielle, then down at her child, suddenly uncomfortable. Danielle took a slow breath. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm but icy. The receptionist folded her arms. "You heard me. You'll need to leave." And just like that, the security guard began walking toward Danielle. Not in a rush, but in that deliberate, quiet way meant to intimidate. His eyes were on her like she was a threat. Danielle looked him dead in the eye, then back at the receptionist. For a moment, no one spoke. The power behind her silence. Danielle didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead to be treated better, because she knew who she was. And she knew something the staff clearly didn't. She wasn't just a customer. She was the primary stakeholder in the account their entire branch had been fighting to win. The account that would boost their quarterly business metrics, the one corporate had been bragging about. She was the client, the big fish, and they had just told her to leave. Danielle nodded slowly, her lips pressed together in a tight, unreadable smile. Then quietly she turned around and walked toward the door, the eyes of nearly everyone in the lobby trailing her every step. She didn't say another word. But in her silence, there was power. The kind of power that doesn't need to yell, the kind that makes moves, not noise. Outside the bank, a different kind of call Danielle stepped back into her Tesla. She shut the door gently, took a breath, and pulled out her phone. She made one call, not to complain, not to ask for an apology, but to give an order. "Hi, Mark," she said, her voice cool. "I just walked out of your Peachtree branch. Your team refused to serve me. One of them actually said, and I quote, 'We don't serve people like you. I want the entire branch staff reviewed and removed. Today.'" Silence. Then a stunned, "Danielle, I can't believe this. I'm going to escalate this immediately." "Good," she said. "Because if I don't see action within the hour, I'm pulling all our funds, all of them. And I'll be sending out a press release about why." She hung up, tossed her phone on the passenger seat, and looked out the window at the building. 10 minutes later, the calls began. Inside the branch, panic spread like wildfire. Phones rang off the hook. Managers were summoned. Screens went dark. By the end of the day, every person involved in Danielle's mistreatment was escorted out, permanently. They didn't just lose a customer. They lost a deal, a reputation, and their jobs, all because they couldn't recognize what success looked like in a black woman's skin. Danielle stood still for a moment, shocked. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't unfamiliar with discrimination. In fact, she'd grown up learning how to navigate it with quiet grace. From subtle glances at luxury stores to condescending tones in boardrooms, she had seen it all. But this was something different. This was bold, public, and humiliating. She tried to process what had just been said to her. She blinked once, as if giving the receptionist a chance to take it back. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Danielle asked, her voice steady but sharp, the kind of tone that lets you know you've crossed a line. The receptionist didn't budge. She didn't apologize. She didn't even pretend to reconsider. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and with an almost casual dismissal replied, "We're busy right now. You'll have to come back later. Or maybe try another location." Danielle's eyes narrowed. She turned her head slightly and scanned the room. "Busy?" The branch was practically empty. There were 3 employees gathered near one of the counters, sipping coffee and talking softly among themselves. 2 desks sat vacant. The lobby had no waiting customers, no business rush, not even a single occupied chair in the lounge area. The only sound came from the low hum of overhead lights and the click of the receptionist's perfectly manicured nails on her keyboard. No, they weren't busy. They were just bothered. Bothered by the presence of a confident black woman who didn't fit the picture they had painted in their minds of what a CEO should look like. Danielle inhaled deeply, swallowing the frustration rising in her throat. She had come here on business, not to fight for basic respect. "I have a scheduled appointment with your business account manager, Mr. Bennington," she repeated, this time slower, calmer, more deliberate. "We confirmed yesterday over the phone." The receptionist didn't even check the computer. She tilted her head and shrugged slightly. "Oh, that must be a mistake. You sure it was with us?" Danielle's heart pounded, not with fear, but with that familiar burn of being doubted, ignored, and disrespected in spaces where she had every right to stand tall. She had built her company from scratch. A cybersecurity firm now serving Fortune 500 clients. She employed over 120 people. She sat on tech panels, advised state-level cyber policy boards, and had just signed a federal contract worth millions. She had more than enough credibility to walk into any bank and open any account she pleased. But somehow, all that was invisible to the young woman behind the desk. And then, without warning, a security guard began to walk over. Not because Danielle had raised her voice, not because she was causing a scene, but because she dared to insist on being treated like any other scheduled client. Because she had the nerve to ask for the appointment she had already earned. Because she didn't lower her voice or shrink herself to avoid making others uncomfortable. The message was clear. You're not welcome here. Danielle didn't move as the security guard approached. He was tall, broad, with a blank expression that betrayed no opinion. He glanced between Danielle and the receptionist, then positioned himself close enough to send a message, but not so close as to intervene just yet. It was all a performance. A calculated pressure tactic meant to intimidate without confrontation. Danielle met the guard's eyes for a split second, then slowly turned back to the receptionist. Her voice, when she finally spoke again, was calm, measured. I see. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, not to call the manager, not to escalate things inside the branch. No, Danielle didn't need to make noise to be heard. She already had the power. What the branch didn't know was that she wasn't just a walk-in client. She wasn't someone hoping to open a small account or apply for a loan. She was the CEO of the very company that had recently selected this bank as their new financial partner, a partnership involving millions of dollars in assets and transactions. It had taken the bank's corporate team months to secure her business. They had flown in executives to pitch their services. They'd offered her top-tier service, waived fees, even customized plans. This branch, it had been hand-picked to handle her account. And now they were dismissing her like a nuisance. Danielle walked slowly out of the lobby, never once lowering her gaze. The silence behind her was almost louder than the receptionist's arrogance. People watched, unsure whether to speak up or stay out of it. The security guard followed her a few steps before stopping at the door. Once outside, Danielle didn't crumble. She didn't cry. She didn't fume. She sat in her Tesla, took a breath, and made one phone call to the senior vice president who had personally overseen her onboarding. "Hi, Mark," she said, her voice cool and composed. "I just left your Peachtree branch. Your staff refused to serve me. I was asked to leave. One even suggested I try another location. Security was called." The line went quiet. "That's unacceptable," he finally said, voice trembling slightly. "Danielle, I don't even have the words." "I don't need words," she replied. "I need action. That team doesn't represent my business, or any professional of color who walks into your branches expecting equal treatment. I want them removed. Today." And with that, she ended the call. Inside the branch, the phone started ringing. Danielle didn't argue. She didn't shout. She didn't beg to be treated with respect. She didn't need to. She had been in too many rooms where power didn't come from volume. It came from precision. It came from timing. It came from knowing who you are and understanding exactly how much damage you can do without ever raising your voice. So instead, she simply walked out of the branch doors, heels echoing against the concrete, posture as straight and unbothered as ever. She got into her Tesla, shut the door with a quiet click, and sat there for a moment in stillness. Then she pulled out her phone and made one call. "Hi, this is Danielle," she said, tone clipped, calm, and unmistakably in control. "I want the entire branch team at the Peachtree office dismissed, immediately. The man on the other end didn't need further explanation. His name was Thomas Crane, a senior executive at the bank's national headquarters. For the past 6 months, he had been doing everything in his power to win Danielle's company as a client. From exclusive presentations to tailored service, packages to personally flying out twice just to meet with her leadership team. He'd worked harder on this deal than any other in his 15-year career, and it had finally paid off. Just last week, Danielle signed the papers. Her company was officially moving over $8 million in business accounts to their institution, money that would be managed, stored, and secured under their name. It was a massive win for the bank, until today. Now all of that was on the verge of slipping through their fingers. Thomas paused on the other end, his voice suddenly small. "Danielle, what happened?" "You can ask your team," she replied coolly. "I walked in for a scheduled meeting. They dismissed me, laughed, told me to leave. One said I should try another location. Security was called." There was silence. "I see," he said after a moment. "I'm so sorry. I'll take care of it." "I'm not interested in apologies," she said. "I want that team gone. Every single employee who was on that floor today. If they could treat me like that, imagine how they're treating other clients who don't have my platform." She ended the call. 10 minutes later, the energy inside the Peachtree branch changed entirely. Phones started ringing, not customer calls. Not appointment confirmations. These were direct lines from corporate, urgent, cold, relentless. The branch manager, who had been sipping coffee in his office, completely unaware of what had transpired in the lobby, suddenly found himself face-to-face with a regional VP on video call, eyes blazing. "Do you know who just walked out of your branch?" he was asked. "No," he answered cautiously. "Someone with an issue at the front desk?" "That was Danielle Harris," the VP snapped. "CEO of Cybrelix Technologies. You just lost one of our biggest new accounts." The manager's face drained of color. Out in the lobby, the receptionist who had turned Danielle away was still chatting with a coworker when she was pulled aside by another supervisor. "You need to log off," she was told. "Now." "What? Why?" "Corporate orders. Please power down and wait." In the back. One by one, the employees involved were called aside, quietly, one after another. Heads down, confused, some nervous, others still too proud to realize what was happening. But the tone had shifted. Whispers started. Keyboards stopped clicking. The branch, which had been filled with smug indifference just half an hour earlier, was now thick with tension. A man from HR arrived an hour later. That's when the final wave hit. Every employee who had interacted with Danielle, who had ignored her, dismissed her, laughed at her, or stood by silently, was told they would not be returning. Immediate suspension. Full review pending. Some broke down in shock. Others argued. One tried to say, "We didn't know who she was." Exactly. That was the problem. It wasn't that Danielle expected to be treated like royalty. It wasn't about celebrity or wealth. It was about basic respect, something that should be granted to every person, regardless of what they look like, or how much money they're bringing in. But they hadn't seen a powerful CEO when Danielle walked in. They'd seen a black woman, and assumed she didn't belong. Now, they were paying the price. Back at her office, Danielle was reviewing quarterly projections when her assistant walked in with a note from the bank's regional director. It was long, emotional, filled with regret. Promises to do better, commitments to retraining, equity initiatives, a public apology if she'd allow it. Danielle scanned it, her expression unreadable. She handed it back. "Tell them I'm pulling the account," she said. Her assistant blinked. "Completely?" "Completely. We don't bank where we're not respected." Word spread fast. Within 24 hours, the incident became internal case study material. Executives were scrambling to do damage control. A memo circulated across departments warning staff about professional conduct, especially involving client interactions. Danielle's quiet but decisive action had triggered a full-scale review of how the company handled discrimination complaints. But Danielle didn't post on social media. She didn't go to the press. She didn't need headlines to validate her experience. The consequences spoke for themselves. She had walked into that bank expecting to open a business account. Instead, She walked out having closed a chapter, one that cost a national financial institution millions in revenue, and served a very loud warning in the quietest, most powerful way possible. Don't mistake someone's silence for weakness, and never underestimate the woman you chose to dismiss. The next morning, as the sun climbed over Atlanta's skyline, Danielle sat at her home office sipping her coffee, calm and composed. Her inbox was overflowing. News had already started circulating internally within the bank's upper ranks. People were panicking. The fallout had only begun. Her phone rang. The number flashing across the screen wasn't a surprise. It was the regional manager himself, a man whose name had appeared on polished emails and brochures just weeks ago when the bank was trying so hard to win Danielle's business. She let the call go to voicemail. Then, a second call came, this time from his assistant, requesting a few minutes of Danielle's time for an urgent and personal matter. Finally, Danielle picked up. "Ms. Harris," the manager began, his voice stiff but trying to sound warm. "First, let me say how deeply sorry I am. What happened at the Peachtree branch is unacceptable. It does not reflect who we are as a company or what we stand for." Danielle said nothing at first. She let the silence do its work. "We've already taken immediate action," he continued, almost rushing now. "The employees involved have been terminated. The branch is under full review. We're working on a new set of trainings to ensure this never happens again." Still, Danielle was quiet. "I understand how damaging this was," he went on. "Not just personally, but professionally. We've failed you, and we know that. If you're open to it, I'd like to arrange a private meeting. We'd also like to offer you enhanced services, assign you a personal executive banker, and, if you'd allow us, we'd like to make a generous donation in your name to a foundation of your choosing." Danielle finally spoke. Her voice was calm, clear, and unmistakably firm. "I appreciate the apology," she said, "and I know you're doing what you can to fix things now. But the truth is, the damage has already been done, not just to me, not just to my company, but to every black professional who's ever walked into a space like that and been made to feel like they didn't belong." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You see, I walked into your branch dressed like a CEO, acting like a CEO, and still got treated like I was in the wrong place. That isn't just a mistake. That's a culture issue. That's a mindset problem." The manager began to interject, something about institutional change, moving forward. But Danielle wasn't interested in vague promises. "I don't want a symbolic gesture," she said flatly. "I want real change, and honestly, I don't believe it starts with a donation made in my name to ease your PR crisis." She had heard it all before, the apologies, the commitments to diversity, the public statements and polished campaigns. But what rarely followed was action, measurable, visible, accountable action. "I built my company from the ground up. No one handed me anything," Danielle continued. "So when I walk into a bank, any bank, I expect to be treated like the business leader I am. Not judged by the color of my skin, not dismissed, not told to try another location." There was silence on the other end. The manager knew he had lost her. Danielle made it clear there would be no private meeting, no salvaging the relationship. She wouldn't be soothed by surface-level apologies or polished offers. The bank had its chance, and they blew it in broad daylight. "I've already made my decision," she said. Later that day, Danielle called her CFO and ordered the complete transfer of all her company's assets from the bank. Every dollar, every account, every line of credit, every investment channel they'd planned to set up there. Gone. Instead, she directed those funds to a black-owned financial institution she had met with months earlier, one that had treated her with nothing but respect, professionalism and warmth from day one. At the time, she'd hesitated to work with a smaller bank, unsure if they had the infrastructure to support her company's fast growth. But now she saw something far more valuable: integrity. That black-owned bank didn't need to know who she was to treat her like a VIP. They didn't need her to flash credentials or announce her title. They saw her, heard her, and welcomed her, like any client deserved to be welcomed, so she took her millions there. Word of Danielle's final move spread quickly, not just within corporate circles, but across business networks, forums, and community. Boards, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and young professionals all began talking about what happened. Some shared their own stories, quiet moments of humiliation, being mistaken for assistance, being overlooked in meetings, being told to wait, while others were helped first. Danielle hadn't posted on social media. She hadn't spoken to the press. And yet her silent action was louder than any statement. And the bank, they felt it immediately. Danielle's decision triggered a ripple effect. Other clients began pulling back. Questions were raised at shareholder meetings. Internal diversity numbers were put under a microscope. The Peachtree incident was no longer a small embarrassment. It was becoming a case study in how fast reputational damage spreads when discrimination meets the wrong target. Because Danielle wasn't just a client. She was a symbol of what many professionals of color face quietly every day, and how, with power and grace, you can flip the script. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to destroy anyone's life. She just made a choice, a better one, a smarter one. And in doing so, she reminded the world of something simple but undeniable. Respect isn't optional, not in business, not in banking, not in life. And when it's withheld, the loss isn't just personal, it's professional, and sometimes it's permanent. Danielle didn't go public to shame anyone. She didn't plaster employee names across the internet. She didn't call for a boycott, and she didn't post angry videos. That wasn't her style, and it wasn't the point. Revenge was easy, but change, real change, took focus, and that's what she was after. The moment she walked out of that bank, she knew she could use her story to make something bigger happen. This wasn't just about her. It was about a much deeper issue that stretched far beyond one bank, one branch, or even one city. So instead of going on a media rampage, she chose her words carefully and shared her experience where it would matter most, on LinkedIn. Her post was calm, composed, and razor-sharp. Yesterday I walked into a bank as a black woman and was told, without any inquiry, without any real interaction, that I didn't belong. I was asked to leave. I was questioned. I was doubted. What they didn't see was the CEO who had a multi-million-dollar account scheduled to launch that day. What they didn't realize was that the woman they dismissed had the authority to hire or fire the very team that showed her to the door. Let this be a reminder to all. Always treat people with dignity. You never know who you're speaking to. She didn't name the bank. She didn't have to. Within hours, the post started gaining traction. Likes, comments, reposts. Quiet nods from professionals who had felt the same sting. Paragraphs from executives admitting their companies had work to do. Shares from diversity leaders, equity consultants, and mentors across industries. And then the bigger names started appearing. CEOs, founders, journalists, politicians. People who had the platform and the following to take Danielle's story even further. What had happened to her struck a nerve because it wasn't rare. It was painfully common. One comment stood out beneath her post, written by another black woman in tech. I was once mistaken for the catering staff at my own product launch. I wish I'd had your composure. Thank you for telling this story. Another from a Latino executive. I've been followed in stores while wearing a $4,000 suit. Our success doesn't erase the assumptions made about our skin. Thank you for using your voice. And yet another. You've just created a blueprint for how to respond with grace and power. We're with you. The story quickly began appearing in business newsletters. HR teams started discussing it in morning huddles. DEI departments used it as a reference in training materials. It was no longer just a story about a bad day at the bank. It was becoming a cultural mirror. Danielle hadn't attacked anyone. She hadn't demanded punishment. She had simply told the truth, but because of who she was and how she carried herself, the impact was immediate and far-reaching. Several companies reached out to her directly, asking for advice on how to prevent similar incidents within their organizations. She turned many of them away. "If you need a story like mine to remind you to treat people with respect," she said, "then your foundation is already cracked." One Fortune 100 executive privately asked her to consult on their company's inclusion strategy. Danielle declined. She didn't want to profit off her pain. She wanted to transform it into awareness, into conversation, into long overdue accountability. The most meaningful response came from a group of young interns at a college Danielle had once mentored. They sent her a letter. "Ms. Harris, we saw what happened. We've all experienced smaller versions of that same moment. Thank you for showing us how to stay powerful, even when others try to make us feel small." Danielle kept that letter on her desk. She didn't do interviews. She didn't sit on a panel. She just kept moving forward, with more fire than ever. But the banking world didn't forget. Behind the scenes, meetings were held. New trainings were rolled out. Branches were reminded that front desk treatment wasn't a minor concern. It could cost millions, and it had. Danielle's quiet stand had done something most viral stories don't. It forced reflection, not just outrage. Her company, meanwhile, continued to grow. The black-owned bank she moved to gave her the service she deserved, not because of her money, but because they saw her humanity first. She ended up partnering with them for a tech education program aimed at underrepresented students, something that mattered far more to her than any apology ever could. Months later, when someone brought up the original incident during a conference Q&A, Danielle gave the simplest answer. "I wasn't interested in destroying anyone. I was interested in building something better." She paused, then added, "There's power in silence, but there's also power in speaking up with purpose." The audience stood and applauded, not for the drama of her story, but for the grace in how she carried it. In the end, Danielle didn't just change one bank's internal policy. She changed how hundreds of professionals thought about everyday bias. She made people look closer, think harder, and realize that respect can't be conditional. Because dignity isn't something that should be earned by proving your title. It's something that should be given to every person who walks through the door. And as Danielle proved, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Quietly, confidently, and with your head held high, leaving behind not just a lesson, but a legacy. So what do we learn from Danielle's story? In just 10 minutes, a team's casual racism cost them their jobs and their company millions in business. But more importantly, it showed the world what quiet power looks like. No yelling, no begging, just action. Let this be a reminder: never judge a book by its cover, and never underestimate the quiet power of a woman who knows her worth. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more real stories that shake the system.